He was the man every parent wanted their daughter to date. Smart, polite, with a dazzling smile. But behind those blue eyes hid something no one could imagine. A predator who turned charm into a weapon and trust into a death sentence. By the time America saw his true face, it was already far too late. Before we dive deeper, what do you think he really was? Human or monster? If that thought already sends a chill down your spine, hit like it helps uncover more stories hidden in the dark. He was the man everyone trusted, polite, handsome, intelligent, the kind of man who made people feel safe, even special, when he spoke to them. To his professors, Ted Bundy was an ambitious law student. To his friends, he was thoughtful, charming, and witty. To his girlfriend, he was gentle and devoted, but beneath that polished surface lived something hollow, something that smiled when others cried. Theodore Robert Bundy was born into a lie. For the first years of his life, he believed his mother was his sister. His grandparents, his supposed parents, hid the truth to avoid scandal. When Ted discovered the deception, something inside him cracked. He began to distrust love, to resent women, to control what he couldn't understand. As a child, the darkness flickered early. His aunt once awoke to find him standing at her bedside, silent, smiling, surrounded by kitchen knives. Neighbors recalled a boy who tormented animals, who enjoyed watching pain unfold. He was clever enough to hide it, careful enough to seem normal. That duality would become his greatest weapon. By his 20s, Bundy had mastered the art of imitation. He could mirror anyone's energy, adjust his tone, his posture, his smile. To some, he seemed almost perfect, a man of empathy and promise. But every gesture was calculated, every glance rehearsed. He was studying people, learning how to blend in and how to make them disappear. In psychology, it's called the mask of sanity, the perfect disguise worn by a psychopath, and no one wore it better than Ted Bundy. In the late 1960s, Ted Bundy seemed to have everything under control. He was young, intelligent, charming, the kind of man who made people believe he was destined for success. He studied psychology at the University of Washington, volunteered at a suicide hotline, and spoke to strangers with warmth and empathy. To everyone around him, Ted was the kind of man who understood people, but no one really understood him. In 1968, he met Diane Edwards, the woman who in many ways would define his life. Diane was everything he wanted to be, poised, confident, from a wealthy family. She became his world, his mirror, proof that he could belong among the people he envied. But when she ended their relationship, citing his immaturity and lack of direction, Bundy's carefully built identity began to fracture. Rejection, to him, wasn't just painful, it was annihilation. He vanished for months, drifting across the country, and when he returned, something had changed. The warmth was still there, but it was colder now, measured, masked. Friends noticed he was different, more controlled, almost rehearsed. He mimicked confidence, charm, even humility. But behind the eyes, something calculating had replaced sincerity. By 1973, Bundy had rebuilt his life. He was excelling in politics, volunteering for the governor's campaign, and applying to law school. He appeared unstoppable, the model of redemption. He even rekindled his relationship with Diane, now determined to prove his worth. But the moment she began to fall for him again, he ended it abruptly. No warning, no emotion. For Ted Bundy, that wasn't closure, it was control, and control would soon become his obsession. By the winter of 1974, Seattle was cold and quiet, but beneath the calm, fear was beginning to take root. The first to vanish was 18-year-old Karen Sparks, a student at the University of Washington. She lived alone in a basement apartment near campus. One night, someone broke in. Her roommate found her the next morning, blood on the sheets, skull fractured, body broken. She survived, but she would never remember who did it. A month later, another woman disappeared. Her name was Linda Ann Healy, 21, bright, responsible, with dreams of becoming a teacher. Her bed was neatly made, her nightgown missing. No forced entry, no sign of struggle, just silence. By spring, the pattern became impossible to ignore. One after another, young women were vanishing. Donna Manson from Evergreen State College, Susan Rancourt from Ellensburg, Roberta Parks from Oregon State, each disappearance more brazen than the last. Witnesses spoke of a handsome stranger, polite, charming. He often wore a sling or a cast, asking for help with his books or unloading something from his car. He introduced himself simply as Ted. The vehicle was always the same, a small, tan Volkswagen Beetle. Unremarkable, forgettable, the kind of car you'd never notice twice. Detectives were baffled. There were no crime scenes, no fingerprints, no connection between victims except for one chilling pattern. They all looked alike, young, educated, with long brown hair parted down the middle. By midsummer, 6 women were gone. No bodies, no clues, only fear. By late summer of 1974, the Pacific Northwest was in shock. 7 women had vanished, all young, all bright, all gone without a trace. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed them whole. But Lake Sammamish changed everything. That day, dozens of witnesses remembered a man, clean-cut, polite, wearing a white tennis outfit and a sling on his arm. He called himself Ted. He asked for help, loading a sailboat into his bronze Volkswagen Beetle. 2 women agreed to help. Neither was ever seen alive again. When police released the description, the city held its breath. Posters went up. Tip lines rang non-stop. Hundreds of calls poured in. Students, neighbors, friends, all describing men they knew named Ted, who drove Volkswagens. The list was long, and near the top was Theodore Bundy. At the time, he was working for the Washington State Republican Party. He smiled easily, spoke intelligently, and had no criminal record. He simply didn't fit the image of a killer. So the police moved on. Meanwhile, Bundy was already gone. He'd left Seattle for Salt Lake City, enrolling at the University of Utah Law School, a fresh start, a new hunting ground. Within weeks of his arrival, women began disappearing again. A teenager named Nancy Wilcox. Then Melissa Smith, the police chief's daughter. Then Laura Aim, last seen leaving a Halloween party. The disappearances blurred together. No evidence, no witnesses, only the echo of a name, Ted. It was the evening of November 8th, 1974, in the quiet suburbs of Murray, Utah. 18-year-old Carol DeRonch was browsing in a local mall when a man approached her. He was handsome, clean-shaven, wearing a crisp suit and a polite smile. He introduced himself as Officer Roseland from the Murray Police Department. He told her someone had tried to break into her car. His tone was calm, reassuring, the voice of authority. He showed her a badge, a flash of metal, convincing enough to silence doubt. Carol followed him out to the parking lot. Her car looked untouched, but he insisted she come to the station to file a report. He opened the door of his tan Volkswagen Beetle. She hesitated, just for a second. Then she got in. Minutes later, something changed. His voice hardened. His eyes went flat. Instead of driving toward the police station, he turned onto a deserted road. When she asked what was happening, he suddenly pulled over. Before she could react, he snapped a handcuff onto her wrist, but fumbled, locking both cuffs onto the same arm. Panic set in. Carol fought back with everything she had. She scratched, screamed, and kicked until the door flew open. She bolted into the street, waving frantically at a passing car. She escaped, barely. Later that night, another young woman, Deborah Kent, just 17, vanished after leaving her high school play. When police searched the area, they found a small key in the parking lot. It fit perfectly into the handcuffs that had trapped Carol DeRonch. For the first time, the mask had cracked, and the monster behind it had a name: Winter 1975. The killings had spread beyond state lines. Washington, Utah, Idaho, Colorado, each case different in detail, but identical in pattern. Women vanishing without warning. No clues, no evidence, only whispers of a man named Ted. Detectives across multiple states were desperate to connect the dots. For the first time, police began using computers to cross-reference suspects. Car models, first names, addresses. Out of thousands of entries, one name kept appearing: Theodore Bundy. He was young, educated, polite, impossible, they thought, but his name lingered like a shadow on every page. Then, on August 16, 1975, a Utah Highway Patrol officer noticed a tan Volkswagen driving erratically through a quiet neighborhood. When he pulled it over, the driver smiled, calm, charming. His name, Ted Bundy. Inside the car, the officer found an ice pick, rope, handcuffs, a ski mask, a crowbar, a killer's toolkit. Bundy claimed it was all for skiing. Investigators began piecing it together. They searched his apartment and discovered plaster, crutches, surgical gloves, the props of his deception. They impounded his Beetle, sending it to an FBI lab. What they found was chilling. Hair fibers from 3 different missing women, each one a perfect match. Statistically impossible unless they had all been inside that car. Then came the confirmation. Carol DeRonch identified Bundy in a lineup. Same face, same voice, same eyes. In February 1976, Ted Bundy was convicted of kidnapping and assault, sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. But investigators knew this wasn't justice. It was only the beginning. Somewhere inside that polite young man was something far worse, something still waiting to be unleashed. June 1977. Inside the Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen, Colorado, Ted Bundy sat calmly at the defense table. He'd been transferred there to face murder charges for the disappearance of Karen Campbell, a young nurse found dead near a ski resort. Bundy, ever the manipulator, had convinced the judge to let him act as his own attorney. It was the perfect setup. No handcuffs, no restraints, freedom to move within the courtroom. For weeks, he studied the case files in the courthouse library. Guards trusted him. He smiled, joked, thanked them by name. He was, after all, the polite one. But Bundy wasn't studying law. He was studying escape routes. On June 7th, during a routine recess, he asked to review a file alone. He walked to a window, looked out at the pine-covered mountains, and jumped 2 stories down. He landed hard, spraining his ankle, but he ran, limping into the forest, vanishing into the wilderness. For 6 days, Bundy wandered the mountains, surviving on stolen food and water. He broke into cabins for clothes, shaved his head, changed his appearance. Posters spread across the state, roadblocks lined the highways, and then, as quietly as he vanished, he was found, driving a stolen car through Aspen, weak but smiling. When police asked why he did it, he simply shrugged. "I just wanted to see if I could." They called it arrogance. But Bundy was only testing the system, probing its limits, because 6 months later, he'd try again. Only this time, he wouldn't come back. January 15th, 1978, Tallahassee, Florida. Inside the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University, most of the women were asleep. Laughter from earlier that night still lingered faintly in the air. Perfume, textbooks, and the warmth of youth. Outside, Ted Bundy moved through the shadows. He had escaped again, this time from a Colorado jail on New Year's Eve. He'd soared through his cell ceiling, climbed into the warden's apartment, changed clothes, and simply walked out the front door. For 10 days, he drifted east across the country under a false name, Chris Hagen. By the time he reached Florida, he was broke, restless, and ready to kill. That night, around 2:45 a.m., he slipped through the back door of the sorority house. He carried an oak log from the fireplace. In less than 15 minutes, he bludgeoned and strangled 2 young women, Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy. 2 others, Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner, were beaten but miraculously survived. When Bundy left, he didn't stop. Within the hour, he broke into another apartment nearby and attacked Cheryl Thomas, leaving her with a fractured skull and permanent hearing loss. The city woke to chaos, blood, screams, confusion. Police found a pantyhose mask, a semen stain, and something else. Bite marks left on Lisa Levy's body. Weeks later, he struck again. 12-year-old Kimberly Leach was abducted from her middle school in Lake City. Her body would be found 7 weeks later. Bundy's final rampage had no logic, no disguise. It was the collapse of control, the moment the mask shattered completely. February 15th, 1978, Pensacola, Florida. It was a quiet morning when Officer David Lee noticed a suspicious orange Volkswagen Beetle drifting through town. When he ran the plates, the car came back stolen. He followed, lights flashing. The driver, a thin, unshaven man, didn't stop. He tried to run. Lee tackled him to the ground after a violent struggle. When the man was handcuffed and searched, he gave a soft, bitter laugh. "I wish you had killed me," he said. At the station, fingerprints confirmed the impossible. The man in custody was Theodore Robert Bundy, escaped killer, fugitive, and one of America's most wanted men. His cross-country nightmare had finally ended, but Ted Bundy wasn't done performing. In June 1979, his trial for the Chi Omega murders began in Miami, the first ever to be broadcast live on national television. Millions watched, transfixed. Bundy smiled for the cameras, flirted with reporters, and even addressed the judge with charm and confidence. He defended himself in court, cross-examining witnesses like a man auditioning for his own myth. But beneath the bravado, the evidence was undeniable. Forensic odontologists matched Bundy's teeth to the bite marks left on Lisa Levy's body, a perfect match. Witnesses placed him near the scene. Survivors identified his face. On July 24, 1979, Ted Bundy was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. When the verdict was read, he showed no remorse, just that familiar hollow smile. He had fooled the world for years. But in that courtroom, under the glare of live cameras, the mask of sanity was finally torn away. Years passed. Behind the thick walls of Florida State Prison, Ted Bundy became both celebrity and specimen. Writers, psychologists, and journalists lined up to speak with him, to glimpse the mind of evil wrapped in a boyish grin. He granted interviews freely, playing the part of the misunderstood genius, each word measured, each confession selective. He wrote letters, received fan mail, and even found love again. Carol Ann Boone, a former co-worker, moved to Florida, testified on his behalf, and ultimately married him in court during his murder trial, a ceremony broadcast live to millions. In 1981, she gave birth to his daughter, Rose. To her, Ted was gentle, loving. But as the execution date crept closer, even Boone began to see the cracks. She stopped visiting, stopped writing. Bundy was alone again. Desperate to delay his death, he offered investigators a trade, bones for time. He would reveal where his victims lay, one secret at a time, if only they'd postpone the inevitable. It was one last performance, manipulation disguised as repentance. Days before his execution, Bundy finally began to speak in detail. He talked of control, of possession, of how killing gave him a deep, almost mystical satisfaction. He blamed his crimes on pornography, on childhood wounds, on everything but himself. Even in his final hours, he refused to give the world the truth. Only fragments, half-truths, performances. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was led to the electric chair. At 7:16 a.m., the currents surged. Outside, hundreds cheered as smoke rose behind the prison gates. The mask was gone, but the evil beneath it still stares back through history. If this story reminds you how fragile trust can be, share it. The truth deserves to be seen. Subscribe to Crimexclusive for more real stories where justice meets the shadows.